It was a simple math problem, really. If an Omega couldn't breed, their market value dropped to zero. Rowan's father always hated a bad investment. The day the clinic confirmed the defect, Rowan didn't see a parent mourning a child's pain. He saw a businessman writing off a total loss. 24 hours later, he was sitting across from a man with striking blue hair and a blank check, waiting for his own father to sign away his life. It was the brutal reality of the bottom line. The clinic smelled intensely of bleach and artificial lavender. It was the kind of smell designed to mask the scent of nervous sweat, but it only managed to amplify it. Rowan sat on the edge of the leather examination chair. It squeaked every time he took a breath. Across the sterile metal desk, Dr. Hayes was refusing to make eye contact. He was looking at the digital tablet in his hands, like it might bite him. Beside Rowan sat his father, Gregory. Gregory was a man carved from old money and rigid expectations. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than the doctor's annual salary. He checked his watch. "Well?" Gregory snapped. "We don't have all day. The preliminary scans were inconclusive. What does the biopsy say?" Dr. Hayes cleared his throat. He set the tablet face down on the desk. Finally, he looked at Rowan, not at Gregory, at Rowan. It was a look of profound, useless pity. Rowan felt his stomach drop out of his body. "The biopsy confirms the anomaly," the doctor said. His voice was too quiet for the harsh, brightly lit room. "Rowan has a severe congenital malformation of the reproductive tract. The scarring is extensive. There is no viable uterine environment. Silence stretched out. It was thick and heavy, like wet concrete. Rowan didn't cry. He didn't gasp. He just stared at the doctor's collar, noticing a tiny fray in the stitching. Infertility. The word didn't even sound real. It sounded like a medical term for someone else. An Omega without a womb was a car without an engine, a decorative shell. Useless. "Surgical options?" Gregory asked. His voice hadn't changed pitch. He sounded exactly as he had an hour ago when asking the receptionist for the Wi-Fi password. "None," Dr. Hayes said. "Any attempt to reconstruct the tissue would result in further necrotizing. He cannot carry a child. Ever. I'm so sorry, Rowan." "Hormone therapy, surrogacy pairing. What are the workarounds?" Gregory pressed. He leaned forward, tapping a manicured fingernail against the metal desk. "Mr. Pierce, you aren't listening. His biology will not support an alpha's knot, let alone a pregnancy. He is completely, irrevocably barren." Gregory stopped tapping. He sat back in his chair. He turned his head slowly and looked at his son. Rowan met his father's eyes. He saw exactly what he expected to see. There was no grief. There was no urge to comfort. There was only the cold, calculating glare of a ledger being balanced in real time. Rowan was 22. He had been groomed since he presented at 15 to marry into a prominent family, to merge corporate dynasties through a strategic mating and an heir. He had endured the etiquette classes, the suppressants, the grueling social conditioning. He had been a blue-chip stock. Now he was a penny stock, bankrupt. "I see," Gregory said. He stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. "Send the bill to my office." "Dad?" Rowan croaked. His throat felt like it was coated in sand. "Get up, Rowan. We're leaving." They walked out of the clinic without another word to the doctor. The ride down in the elevator was suffocating. Gregory stared straight ahead at the brass doors. Rowan looked at his own hands, resting in his lap. They were shaking slightly. He clamped them together to make it stop. The rain was coming down in sheets when they reached the town car. The driver opened the door, and they slid into the expansive back seat. As soon as the door shut, the privacy partition rolled up. Gregory pulled out his phone. He didn't look at Rowan. "Cancel the dinner with the Chamberlain family," he said into the receiver. "Tell them it's a family emergency. And get me Richard on the line. Yes, the broker." Rowan turned his head to look out the window. The city lights smeared into long, colorful streaks across the wet glass. "You're calling a broker," Rowan said. It wasn't a question. Gregory didn't cover the mouthpiece. You are effectively useless to our current strategy. I need to liquidate the asset before word of this gets out to the social registry. If the Chamberlains find out you're defective, the resulting scandal will tank the merger. Liquidate the asset. Rowan repeated the words. They tasted like ash. Don't be dramatic, Gregory snapped, finally glaring at him. You cost millions to raise, Rowan. Millions in education, wardrobe, housing. I expect a return on my investment. A broken Omega still holds novelty value to the right buyer, someone who doesn't care about a bloodline. Novelty value. A toy, a pet, a punching bag. Gregory returned to his phone. Richard. Yes, it's Gregory. We have a situation. The boy is barren, completely. Yes, I know. I need a private buyer. Immediate transfer of guardianship and mating rights. No public registry, discreet. A pause. Gregory's eyes narrowed. I don't care about the discount. Find someone who pays cash and keeps their mouth shut. Rowan leaned his head against the cold glass. The heater in the car was blasting, but he had never felt so violently cold in his entire life. He closed his eyes, listening to his father auction him off to the highest bidder in the middle of Tuesday afternoon traffic. It took exactly 36 hours. 36 hours from the moment Dr. Hayes handed down the sentence to the moment Rowan found himself sitting in a private conference room on the top floor of a downtown financial tower. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He had packed a single suitcase. Gregory had told him to leave the jewelry and the designer clothes bought for his debut season. Those belonged to the estate, his father had said. Rowan packed 3 pairs of jeans, a few sweaters, and a battered paperback book he had owned since he was a teenager. That was the sum total of his 22 years on Earth. The conference room was vast, dominated by a long table made of polished black walnut. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, dizzying view of the city. It made Rowan feel mildly nauseous. He sat in a high-backed leather chair, his hands folded in his lap, staring at the grain of the wood. The door clicked open. Rowan didn't look up immediately. He heard the heavy, confident footfalls of an alpha. The scent hit him a second later. It wasn't the overpowering, aggressive stench of a dominant alpha trying to establish territory. It was subtle. Dry cedarwood, a hint of ozone, like the air right before a thunderstorm, and bitter black coffee. It was grounding. It didn't make Rowan's instincts scream in submission. It just made him hyper-aware. He finally raised his eyes. The man walking into the room did not look like the geriatric creeps or underground cartel bosses Rowan had spent the last 2 nights having nightmares about. He was young, early 30s maybe, tall, with broad shoulders hidden beneath a sharply tailored, minimalist black suit. No tie. But it was his hair that arrested Rowan's attention. It was a deep midnight blue, not a bright, unnatural dye job, but a dark, saturated sapphire that caught the ambient light of the room. It was an anomaly in a world of conservative corporate grays and browns. It spoke of a man who did whatever he wanted because no one had the power to tell him no. His face was angular, his jawline sharp, and his eyes were a pale, piercing gray. They swept over the room, dismissing Gregory entirely, and locked onto Rowan. Rowan held his breath. He expected to see lust. He expected to see the greasy, possessive gleam of a man buying a broken toy he could use without consequence. But the gray eyes were entirely unreadable. There was an assessment there, clinical and detached. "Mr. Cole?" Gregory said, stepping forward with a manufactured smile, extending a hand. "Prompt as always, I appreciate your discretion in this matter." Cillian Cole did not take the hand. He merely looked at it until Gregory awkwardly let it drop back to his side. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Gregory," Cillian said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone. It didn't boom, but it filled the room effortlessly. "I have the contract. You have the asset. Let's finish this." He walked to the opposite side of the table and sat down, dropping a slim leather folder onto the wood. Gregory cleared his throat, clearly rankled but unwilling to jeopardize the sale. He took his seat next to Rowan. "Of course. As my broker mentioned, Rowan is highly educated, fluent in 3 languages, top marks in domestic management and classical piano. Despite his recent medical diagnosis, he remains a highly compliant and well-bred Omega. Rowan felt a flush of absolute humiliation burn up his neck. He was being pitched like a used luxury car. Low mileage, slight engine defect, good upholstery. Cillian leaned back in his chair. He steepled his fingers, his gray eyes resting on Gregory. I don't care about his piano skills, Gregory. I'm not buying him to entertain dinner guests. Naturally, Gregory said smoothly. His primary value to you would be in his absolute unavailability for pregnancy, a permanent risk-free companion, the ultimate convenience. The price your broker quoted was $10 million, Cillian said, cutting through the sales pitch. For a defective Omega being sold off-market to avoid a scandal, you're overplaying your hand. $10 million is a steal for the Pierce bloodline, regardless of his fertility, Gregory argued. 5, Cillian countered. His voice was flat. And I take him right now. You sign the non-disclosure agreement. You forfeit all rights to contact him, track him, or claim him in the future. He ceases to exist in the Pierce family tree. Gregory hesitated. The greed warred with the urgency in his eyes. He looked at Rowan, then back to Cillian. 7. 5.5, Cillian said. Or I walk out that door, and tomorrow morning I leak the medical records of your barren son to the Chamberlains myself. How much will that cost your merger? Rowan sucked in a quiet breath. The threat was a clean, surgical strike. Cillian had done his homework. He knew exactly where the knife went in. Gregory's jaw tightened. The facade of the polite businessman vanished, leaving only a snarling, cornered animal. Fine, 5.5. Give me the damn papers. Cillian slid the leather folder across the table. Rowan watched his father uncap a heavy fountain pen. There was no hesitation, no final lingering glance. Gregory flipped to the back page and signed his name with aggressive, sharp strokes. He stamped his thumb onto the biometric pad, finalizing the digital transfer. It took less than 30 seconds. 22 years of life. A son. Erased in half a minute for $5.5 million. Cillian picked up the folder. He checked the signature, then tapped his own phone. A second later, Gregory's phone chimed with a notification. The transfer of funds was complete. Gregory stood up. He didn't look at Rowan. He's yours. Good luck with him. He turned and walked out of the conference room. The heavy door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Rowan sat frozen. His hands were gripping his knees so hard his knuckles ached. He was completely untethered. He belonged to no one, and he belonged to a stranger. Cillian stood up slowly. He picked up the folder. Do you have anything else? Cillian asked. Rowan blinked, startled by the direct address. He looked up at the towering alpha. What? Belongings. Did he let you pack anything, or do we need to stop at a store? I have a bag. In the lobby. Rowan's voice was a harsh whisper. He hated how weak he sounded. Cillian nodded once. Let's go then. He didn't bark an order. He didn't grab Rowan's arm. He just turned and walked toward the door, expecting Rowan to follow. Rowan pushed himself up on shaking legs. He took one last look at the empty chair where his father had sat, and then he followed the man with the blue hair out into the corridor. The ride in Cillian's car was agonizingly quiet. It wasn't a chauffeur-driven limousine, but a sleek, matte black sports coupe. Cillian drove it himself. Rowan sat in the passenger seat, his battered suitcase in the trunk, clutching his seatbelt like a lifeline. He kept his eyes fixed on the dashboard. He was waiting for it. He was waiting for the moment the polite facade dropped. For Cillian to reach over, to establish dominance, to remind Rowan exactly what he had been bought for. Every time Cillian shifted gears, Rowan flinched slightly. But the alpha never touched him. He drove with one hand on the wheel, his expression relaxed, his jaw unclenched. The radio was off. The only sound was the low purr of the engine and the drumming of rain against the windshield. They left the dense, vertical sprawl of the city center and headed up into the hills. The roads grew narrower, winding through thick pine forests that smelled dark and green in the rain. Rowan's imagination was running riot. He thought Cillian was taking him somewhere isolated, somewhere no one could hear anything. His chest tightened in a familiar panic. He had been trained to endure, to submit, but the reality of his total helplessness was a suffocating weight. Finally, the car slowed and turned down a long, unmarked driveway paved with crushed black gravel. They emerged into a clearing. Rowan looked out the window, expecting an imposing Gothic monstrosity or a heavily guarded compound. Instead, he saw a house of striking minimalist architecture. It was built into the side of the hill, a beautiful brutalist composition of poured concrete, dark steel, and massive walls of glass that looked out over the valley. It wasn't a dungeon. It was an architectural digest cover. Cillian parked the car under a cantilevered concrete canopy. He killed the engine. "We're here," Cillian said. He got out of the car. Rowan scrambled to unbuckle his seatbelt, his fingers fumbling with the latch. By the time he opened his door, Cillian had already retrieved Rowan's suitcase from the trunk. "I can carry that," Rowan said quickly, stepping out into the damp, cold air. Cillian looked at the scuffed bag, then at Rowan. "It's fine. Follow me." He led Rowan to the front door, which unlocked seamlessly as Cillian approached. The interior of the house was vast and open. The floors were polished dark stone. The furniture was sparse, expensive, and functional. There was no clutter, no personal photographs. It looked like a luxury hotel waiting for its first guest. The silence here was different from the silence in the clinic or the conference room. It wasn't heavy with expectation or betrayal. It was just empty. Cillian carried the bag down a long hallway lined with abstract art. He stopped in front of a door at the far end and pushed it open. "This is your room," Cillian said, stepping aside so Rowan could look in. Rowan stepped over the threshold. It was a massive bedroom. A king-sized bed with dark gray linens dominated the space. There was a sitting area, a massive walk-in closet, and an ensuite bathroom lined with black marble. A wall of glass looked out into the dense forest, but heavy blackout curtains were currently pulled open. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. Rowan turned around slowly, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at Cillian, who was standing in the doorway. "Where is your room?" Rowan asked. His voice was steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Cillian pointed a thumb down the hall. "Opposite end of the house." Rowan blinked. "Oh." He looked back at the massive bed. "So, I wait here for you?" Cillian frowned. It was the first shift in expression Rowan had seen from him, a slight creasing of the brow. "Wait for me for what?" Rowan felt a flash of hot, embarrassed anger. Why was the alpha making him say it? For whatever you bought me for. I know how this works. I'm defective, but I'm still functional. You paid $5.5 million. You didn't buy me to give me a nice view of the trees." Cillian stared at him. The gray eyes were sharp, dissecting Rowan's defensive posture, his crossed arms, the slight tremor in his jaw. Slowly, Cillian reached into his jacket pocket. Rowan flinched instinctively, but Cillian just pulled out a small metallic keycard. He tossed it onto the bed. It landed softly on the duvet. "That operates the electronic lock on this door," Cillian said. His voice was calm, completely devoid of aggression. "It locks from the inside, Rowan, not the outside." Rowan stared at the keycard. He didn't understand. "I don't expect you to wait in here for me," Cillian continued, his tone methodical. "I don't expect you in my bed. I don't expect you to serve me, entertain me, or act like an obedient pet." "Then why did you buy me?" Rowan blurted out. The confusion was worse than the fear. It stripped away the cynical armor he had spent the last 2 days building. Cillian looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The rain patterned softly against the massive windows. "Because your father was going to sell you to a man named Silas Vance," Cillian said quietly. Rowan froze. He knew the name. Everyone in the high society registries knew the name. Vance ran a private club. Omegas who went into Vance's ownership rarely appeared in public again, and when they did, they had dead, vacant eyes. I knew what he would do to an Omega with no family protection and an infertility diagnosis, Cillian said. So, I outbid him. Rowan stared at the blue-haired alpha, his mind short-circuiting. You spent $5 million out of pity? I don't do pity, Cillian said flatly. I had the capital. It was a necessary intervention, nothing more. He stepped back into the hallway. Get some sleep, Rowan. The kitchen is fully stocked. Eat when you're hungry. We will discuss the ground rules tomorrow. Before Rowan could say another word, Cillian reached out, grabbed the handle of the door, and pulled it shut. Click. Rowan stood alone in the center of the massive, cold room. He stared at the closed door. Then, slowly, he walked over to the bed and picked up the keycard. He walked back to the door, held his breath, and swiped it over the internal sensor. The heavy bolt slid into place with a solid metallic thud. Locked from the inside. Rowan sank down with his back against the thick wood of the door, pulling his knees to his chest. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he sat in the doctor's office, he allowed himself to cry. Not out of grief for the family he lost, but out of absolute, terrifying bewilderment at the cage he had just walked into. A cage with a lock on the inside. Sunlight did not gently coax Rowan awake. It assaulted him. He hadn't closed the blackout curtains. The morning sun breached the tree line and hit the massive glass wall of his bedroom, flooding the space with a harsh, blinding glare. Rowan groaned, shielding his eyes with a forearm. His neck ached. He hadn't slept in the bed. He had spent the entire night curled on the floor rug, his back pressed firmly against the locked door. He sat up slowly, his joints popping. His mouth tasted stale. The reality of yesterday crashed over him in a sickening wave. The clinic, the boardroom, the $5.5 million wire transfer. He was property, but property that had locked itself in its own room. Rowan pushed himself off the floor. He showered in the black marble bathroom, the scalding water doing nothing to wash away the phantom sensation of his father's dismissive gaze. He dressed in yesterday's jeans and a faded gray sweater. He didn't bother with his hair. There was no one to impress, no suitor to court. He swiped the keycard. The deadbolt retracted with a heavy click. The house was eerily silent. Rowan walked down the long, gallery-like hallway. His bare feet made no sound on the cold stone. The minimalist aesthetic, which had seemed so imposing in the dark, looked stark and clinical in the daylight. He found the kitchen. It was an expansive chef's setup, all brushed steel, dark wood, and matte black appliances. It looked completely unused, except for the man standing at the island. Cillian was dressed in a simple black t-shirt and gray sweatpants. His blue hair was damp, sticking up at odd angles. He looked less like a ruthless corporate predator and more like a tired graduate student. He was methodically grinding coffee beans. The scent hit Rowan immediately. Dry cedar and that sharp, clean crackle of ozone. It wasn't spiked with dominance or demand. It was just present. Cillian didn't look up from the grinder. There's tea in the pantry if you don't drink coffee. Eggs and bread in the fridge. Rowan hovered in the doorway. He felt profoundly out of place. I can make breakfast. For you, I mean, if you want. I don't eat breakfast, Cillian said. He dumped the grounds into a French press and poured hot water over them. Only then did he look up. His gray eyes were bloodshot. Sit down, Rowan. We need to talk. Rowan felt his stomach knot. Here it comes, he thought. The facade of kindness was over. Now came the demands. He walked to one of the high leather stools at the island and sat. He kept his hands folded tightly in his lap. Cillian poured his coffee. He didn't offer any to Rowan. He leaned against the counter opposite him, taking a slow sip. I prefer to keep things simple, Cillian began, his voice raspy with sleep. I travel frequently for work. When I'm here, I work out of the office down the hall. I require quiet during the day. You have full run of the house, the grounds, and the home theater in the basement. You have a dedicated high-speed network for whatever you want to do online." Rowan blinked. He waited for the other shoe to drop. "And?" "And what?" "And my duties," Rowan said, his voice tight. "My schedule. When do you need me available?" Cillian frowned. It was that same slight, confused creasing of the brow from the night before. "Available for what?" "For you," Rowan finally snapped, his frustration overriding his trained subservience. "You bought me. You own my contract. Stop treating me like a house guest. Tell me what you expect me to do to earn my keep." Cillian set his coffee mug down on the granite counter. The soft clink echoed loudly. "I bought your contract to prevent a monster from buying it," Cillian said, his tone turning dangerously even. "That was the extent of the transaction. You don't have duties. You don't have a schedule. You don't earn your keep." "That makes no sense," Rowan argued, his chest heaving. "Nobody spends millions of dollars for nothing." "It wasn't nothing. It was a transfer of assets. I have the capital. You needed an exit." Cillian rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking suddenly exhausted. "Look, I know how you were raised. I know the Pierce family treated you like a breeding mare waiting for an auction block. But you are out. You are medically unviable, which means the registry doesn't care about you anymore. You are a ghost. Act like one. Sleep in. Read a book. Find a hobby. Just stay out of my way when I'm working." Rowan stared at him, trying to find the lie in the alpha's gray eyes. He couldn't. Cillian reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black credit card. He slid it across the island. "That's linked to a secondary account. There's a monthly allowance. Use it for clothes, food delivery, whatever you want. If you need a car, the keys to the SUV are by the front door. Don't crash it." Rowan looked at the card. It felt like a trap. "You're just giving me money?" "I'm giving you autonomy," Cillian corrected. He picked up his coffee mug. "Don't mistake it for affection. I like my space, and I like my quiet. If you respect that, we won't have any problems." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Rowan alone with a black credit card and a profound, terrifying lack of purpose. 3 weeks passed. They were the longest, strangest 3 weeks of Rowan's life. The cage doors were wide open, but Rowan had no idea how to fly. His entire existence had been structured around anticipation, anticipating his father's moods, anticipating the strict schedule of tutors, etiquette coaches, and dietitians, anticipating the needs of whatever theoretical alpha he was destined to marry. Now, there was nothing. Cillian was a phantom in his own home. He emerged early in the mornings to make coffee, vanished into his home office, and often didn't reappear until long after the sun had set. He ate erratic meals, usually takeout consumed in front of a glowing computer monitor. Rowan tried to adapt. He really did. But the silence of the house gnawed at him. It felt like a test he was failing. So he fell back on his conditioning. He started cleaning. He didn't just tidy up. He scrubbed. He spent hours on his hands and knees polishing the dark stone floors. He reorganized the pantry alphabetically. He washed the massive windows until his shoulders screamed in agony. Cillian noticed but said nothing. He simply stepped around the wet floors and ignored the impeccably organized spice rack. When the cleaning didn't provoke a reaction, Rowan escalated. He started cooking. He drew on years of expensive culinary training meant to impress high society dinner guests. He roasted ducks with cherry glazes. He baked intricate pastries. He prepared elaborate, multi-course meals and set them out on the dining table exactly at 7 o'clock every evening. For the first 4 days, Cillian didn't show up. The food grew cold. Rowan sat at the end of the long table, staring at his perfect, useless creations, and felt a familiar, hollow ache in his chest. He would throw the food in the garbage disposal at midnight, his throat tight with unshed tears. On the 5th day, Rowan was plating a saffron risotto when Cillian walked into the kitchen. The alpha stopped. He looked at the perfectly set table in the adjacent dining area, then at the steaming pan in Rowan's hands. "What is this?" Cillian asked. His voice was flat. "Dinner," Rowan said automatically, pasting on a polite, compliant smile. "Saffron risotto with seared scallops. I noticed you haven't been eating well." Cillian didn't smile back. He walked slowly toward the island. The scent of ozone flared, sharp and crackling, carrying a distinct edge of irritation. "Did I ask you to cook?" Rowan's smile faltered. "No, but I thought—" "I told you I eat when I have time. I told you I prefer my own routine." Cillian gestured toward the dining room. "You've been doing this all week, throwing away hundreds of dollars of food." Rowan flushed hot with shame. He set the pan down heavily. "I was just trying to be useful." "I don't need you to be useful." "Then what do you need me to be?" Rowan shouted. The polite facade shattered entirely. He grabbed a kitchen towel and threw it violently onto the counter. "I can't just sit here. I can't just stare at the wall and wait for the day to end. My whole life I was told my only value was what I could provide to an alpha. Now I can't even provide an heir. I have nothing. If I can't cook for you, if I can't clean your house, what am I doing here? Why do I exist?" His chest was heaving. He was shaking. He expected Cillian to shout back. He expected to be struck. Alphas did not tolerate hysteria. But Cillian didn't move. He just watched Rowan unravel, his gray eyes dark and unreadable. "You are institutionalized, Rowan," Cillian said quietly. The clinical accuracy of the word felt like a slap. "You've been trained to view yourself as an appliance," Cillian continued, his voice losing its harsh edge. "A machine that needs to justify its electricity usage. But you're broken now. You said it yourself. You're fundamentally broken for the market you were built for." Rowan squeezed his eyes shut. Tears finally breached his lashes, hot and humiliating. "I know." "Good. Then stop trying to run the program." Cillian walked around the island. He stopped 2 feet away from Rowan. It was the closest they had been since the car ride. Rowan tensed, his instincts bracing for a physical correction. Instead, Cillian reached past him and picked up one of the tasting spoons resting by the stove. He dipped it into the risotto, blew on it, and took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully. "It's oversalted," Cillian said. Rowan's eyes snapped open. "It is not." "It is, and the scallops are slightly rubbery." Cillian tossed the spoon into the sink. "You cook like someone trying to pass a test, not like someone who actually enjoys eating." Rowan bristled, indignation momentarily overriding his misery. "I was trained by a Michelin-starred chef." "I don't care if you were trained by Gordon Ramsay. It tastes like anxiety." Cillian turned away and opened the refrigerator. He grabbed a bottle of water. "Stop cooking for me, Rowan. Cook for yourself. Or don't cook at all. Order pizza for a week. Eat ice cream for breakfast. Figure out what you like, not what you think I expect." Cillian twisted the cap off the water bottle. He looked back at Rowan, his expression softening just a fraction. "You're in a cage with the door blown off the hinges," Cillian said. "It's time to step outside." He walked out of the kitchen, leaving Rowan staring at the ruined risotto. Rowan picked up a clean spoon, took a bite, and frowned. Cillian was right. It was definitely oversalted. It began with a thunderstorm. The weather in the mountains was volatile. Late one Tuesday afternoon, the sky turned a bruised, ugly purple. The wind picked up, howling through the pines and rattling the massive glass panes of the house. Rowan was in the living room, curled in an oversized armchair with a book he wasn't reading. Thunderstorms had always terrified him. In his father's house, a storm meant power outages, which meant the climate control failed, which meant his father would be in a foul, unpredictable mood. Rowan's body was wired to associate thunder with danger. A massive crack of lightning fractured the sky, striking far too close. The boom rattled Rowan's teeth. Instantly, the house plunged into pitch darkness. The power was out. Rowan gasped, his book falling to the floor. His heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He pulled his knees to his chest, trying to control his breathing. "It's fine. It's just a storm. You're alone. No one is coming to hurt you." But the darkness was suffocating. He heard footsteps, heavy, steady footfalls approaching from the hallway. Rowan shrank back into the chair. A beam of light cut through the gloom. Cillian walked into the living room holding a heavy-duty tactical flashlight. He was wearing his usual dark clothes, his blue hair casting strange, erratic shadows on his forehead. He swept the light around the room until it landed on Rowan. Rowan flinched, squeezing his eyes shut against the glare. The light immediately pointed downward, hitting the floor instead. "Generators should kick in." Cillian's voice cut through the sound of the rain. "They're on a delay. Give it a minute." Rowan nodded jerkily, unable to speak around the tight knot in his throat. Cillian didn't leave. He walked over and set the flashlight on the coffee table so it illuminated the ceiling, bathing the room in a soft, diffused glow. He sat down on the sofa opposite Rowan's chair. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just sat there. Rowan forced his eyes open. He looked at the alpha. Cillian was leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the flashlight. Another crack of thunder shook the house. Rowan whimpered, a small, pathetic sound that escaped before he could swallow it. He clamped a hand over his mouth, mortified. Cillian's head turned, his gray eyes locked onto Rowan. Rowan braced himself for the sneer, for the command to stop acting like a frightened child. Instead, the scent hit him. Usually Cillian's scent was a faint background noise, but now it bloomed. The dry, warm smell of cedarwood filled the space between them, thick and grounding. But it was the ozone that did it. It wasn't the sharp, acrid smell of a burning wire. It was the fresh electric charge of the air right after lightning strikes, clean, revitalizing, and incredibly safe. It was a deliberate release of pheromones, an alpha's comforting scent. Rowan's biology reacted instantly. Despite being barren, his olfactory receptors still functioned. The scent bypassed his rational, traumatized brain and hit his central nervous system directly. His heart rate began to slow. The tension coiled in his shoulders unspooled. A wave of heavy narcotic calm washed over him. He let out a long, shaky breath, his hand dropping from his mouth. "Better?" Cillian asked softly. Rowan nodded, his eyes wide. "Yes, thank you." They sat in the soft light for another few minutes, listening to the rain lash against the glass. The heavy scent of cedar and ozone remained, holding back the panic. "What do you do?" Rowan asked suddenly. His voice was a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would break the fragile peace. Cillian looked at him. "What do you mean?" "In your office. You work all hours. You don't have a corporate job, not really. You don't take meetings. What do you actually do?" Cillian hesitated. He looked away, back toward the flashlight. "I build security architecture." "Like alarms?" "Digital," Cillian clarified. "I find flaws in systems before other people exploit them. I build walls." Rowan thought about the brutalist house, built into a hillside, fortified and isolated. He thought about the man who bought a broken Omega just to keep him away from a predator. "You build walls," Rowan repeated softly. "It's tedious work. Requires a lot of isolation." Cillian rubbed the back of his neck. "I prefer code to people. Code is predictable. It does what it's supposed to do." "And people don't?" "People are messy," Cillian said, looking back at Rowan. The gray eyes were guarded, but there was a crack in the armor, a sliver of vulnerability. "People break their own rules." Before Rowan could respond, a heavy hum vibrated through the floorboards. The backup generators roared to life. A second later, the house lights flickered, then blazed into harsh, unforgiving existence. The soft, intimate shadows vanished. Cillian blinked against the sudden brightness. The heavy, comforting scent of cedar and ozone retracted almost instantly, pulled back behind ironclad control. Cillian stood up. The brief moment of connection was gone, replaced by the aloof, untouchable alpha. "Power's back," Cillian said briskly. He reached down and switched off the flashlight. I have to get back to work. There's a system update compiling. Rowan watched him walk away. The living room felt colder without him. Cillian, Rowan called out. The Alpha paused in the doorway, turning his head slightly. Thank you, Rowan said. He didn't mean for the flashlight. Cillian didn't reply. He just nodded once and vanished down the dark hallway. Rowan sat in the chair for a long time. His heart was steady. The fear of the storm had entirely dissipated. He realized with a startling clarity that his body hadn't just relaxed, it had felt safe. He was broken. He was barren. He was a piece of property bought to spite a monster. But as he breathed in the lingering faint trace of cedarwood, Rowan thought that perhaps, just perhaps, the cage he had been placed in wasn't a cage at all. Maybe it was a fortress. Rebellion did not start with a scream. It started with pepperoni and extra cheese. Rowan stared at the black credit card sitting on the kitchen island. It had been 4 days since the thunderstorm. 4 days since he had realized his survival wasn't contingent on his perfection. He picked up his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen. It felt like defusing a bomb. He found a local pizzeria that delivered to the hills. He ordered a large pie, garlic knots, and a 2-liter bottle of soda. He didn't ask for a salad. He didn't check the caloric content. When the delivery driver buzzed the front gate, Rowan walked out to meet him in a pair of loose sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. He tipped the teenager an obscene amount of money, took the greasy cardboard box, and carried it inside. He didn't set the dining table. He didn't use a plate. Rowan sat cross-legged on the rug in the living room, opened the box, and pulled out a slice. A long string of molten cheese detached and landed squarely on his shirt, leaving a bright orange grease stain. In his father's house, a stained shirt was grounds for a 2-hour lecture on presentation and a docked allowance. Rowan looked at the stain. Then he took a massive bite of the pizza. It was salty, heavy, and absolutely incredible. He was halfway through his 3rd slice when he heard footsteps. Cillian walked into the living room, pausing when he saw Rowan on the floor surrounded by garlic knots. The Alpha looked at the pizza box, then at the grease stain on Rowan's chest. Rowan froze. The chewed food in his mouth suddenly felt like sawdust. The old instincts screamed at him to apologize, to stand up, to hide the mess. He forced himself to stay seated. He swallowed hard. There's plenty left, Rowan said. His voice wavered only slightly. If you want some. Cillian didn't say anything. He walked over, lowered his tall frame onto the rug opposite Rowan, and reached into the box. He pulled out a slice, folded it in half, and took a bite. They skimp on the sauce, Cillian noted, chewing thoughtfully. I like it, Rowan replied defensively. I didn't say it was bad. Just an observation. Cillian grabbed a napkin and wiped his mouth. You've got grease on your shirt. I know. Good. Cillian took another bite. They ate the rest of the pizza in silence. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the boardroom. It was the easy, unremarkable silence of two people who didn't feel the need to fill the air with useless noise. The next morning, Rowan took his rebellion a step further. Behind the house, hidden by a grove of dense pines, sat an old, dilapidated greenhouse. It was made of oxidized iron and clouded glass. Rowan had noticed it during his frantic window-washing phase. He walked out to it after breakfast. The door groaned in protest as he pushed it open. The air inside was stale and thick with dust. Wooden planting beds were filled with dead, brittle weeds and cracked, dry earth. It was a graveyard of neglected things. Rowan went back into the house, grabbed the keys to the SUV, and drove into town. He returned 3 hours later with the trunk loaded with bags of potting soil, fertilizer, hand tools, and a dozen trays of seedlings. He didn't buy exotic orchids or high-maintenance roses. He bought tomatoes, jalapenos, basil. Things that were meant to be consumed, not just admired. He changed into the oldest clothes he had and went to work. He pulled weeds until his hands blistered. He hauled heavy bags of soil, dumping them into the wooden beds, the dust coating his arms and face. He didn't wear gloves. He wanted to feel the earth. He wanted to feel the grit beneath his fingernails. For 22 years, his hands had been manicured, softened with lotions, kept pristine for an alpha's touch. By mid-afternoon, his back was screaming. His knees were bruised. He had a smudge of dark loam across his forehead. He had never felt better. He was kneeling in the dirt, carefully separating the fragile roots of a tomato plant, when a shadow fell over him. He looked up. Cillian was standing in the doorway of the greenhouse. He held 2 mugs of coffee. "I saw the car was moved," Cillian said. He stepped inside, navigating the scattered empty soil bags, and handed a mug to Rowan. Rowan took it. His dirty fingers left dark smears on the white ceramic. "I hope you don't mind. The space was just sitting here." "It's been empty since I bought the property," Cillian said, looking around. He didn't seem annoyed by the mess. "What are you planting?" "Vegetables. Herbs." Rowan took a sip of the coffee. It was black and bitter. He was starting to acquire a taste for it. "Things that actually do something." Cillian crouched down next to him. He looked at Rowan's hands. He looked at the dirt under his fingernails and the blister forming on his thumb. "You're making a mess," Cillian observed. Rowan met his gaze squarely. "Yes, I am." Cillian's mouth twitched. It was a minute movement, barely there, but Rowan saw it. It was the closest thing to a smile the alpha had ever shown. "Keep the tomatoes away from the basil," Cillian said, standing back up. "They compete for the same nutrients in the soil. One will choke the other out." Rowan blinked in surprise. "You know about gardening?" "I know about resource management," Cillian replied dryly. "Dinner at 7. We're ordering Thai." He turned and walked back toward the house. Rowan looked down at the fragile green shoot in his dirty hands. He smiled. It was a small, genuine thing pulling at the corners of his mouth. He gently pressed the tomato plant into the earth and covered the roots. The shift in their dynamic was glacial, but absolute. They became roommates, then something adjacent to friends. Rowan stopped trying to anticipate Cillian's needs and started simply living alongside him. If Rowan wanted to read, he took his book into Cillian's office and sat on the leather sofa while the alpha typed lines of endless glowing code. The faint smell of cedar and ozone became the background noise of Rowan's life. It was a constant anchor. 3 months passed. The tomatoes in the greenhouse grew tall and heavy with green fruit. Rowan's hands were permanently calloused. He had stopped flinching when Cillian walked into a room. He had stopped expecting a blow that was never going to come. Then, the outside world finally found the fortress. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Rowan was in the kitchen chopping the first harvest of his basil for a pesto when the house's internal alarm chimed. It wasn't the loud, piercing shriek of a break-in. It was a low, synthesized pulse. Rowan frowned. He wiped his hands on a towel and walked down the hall to Cillian's office. The heavy oak door was ajar. Cillian was sitting at his massive desk, but he wasn't typing. He was staring at a secondary monitor mounted on the wall. Rowan stepped inside. "What is that noise?" Cillian didn't look at him. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscle twitched. "We have a visitor at the main gate." Rowan looked at the monitor. It displayed a high-definition feed from the perimeter security cameras. A black SUV was parked aggressively across the driveway entrance. A man was standing at the intercom pedestal, jabbing the call button repeatedly. His charcoal suit was rumpled. His tie was loose. His face was red and distorted with fury. It was Gregory Pierce. Rowan felt the floor drop out from under him. The air in his lungs evaporated. The scent of basil and garlic was immediately replaced by the phantom smell of artificial lavender and clinical bleach. His hands began to shake. "He found me," Rowan whispered, stepping backward. He came back. Cillian finally turned in his chair. He saw the color drain from Rowan's face. Instantly, the room filled with the sharp, crackling scent of ozone. It was heavier this time, a thick, protective blanket thrown over Rowan's rising panic. "He didn't find you," Cillian said. His voice was cold iron. He found my property line. There's a difference. Cillian reached over and tapped a key on his console. The intercom feed clicked on. Gregory's voice filled the office, tinny but unmistakable. "No, you're in there, Cole. Open the damn gate. You set me up." Rowan gripped the back of the leather sofa. "What is he talking about?" "The Chamberlain merger," Cillian said quietly, his eyes fixed on the screen. "It collapsed yesterday morning. Chamberlain discovered Gregory had been artificially inflating his domestic shipping numbers to hide a massive deficit. The stock tanked. Gregory is ruined." "You tipped them off!" Gregory screamed through the speaker, kicking the metal pedestal. "You bought the defect to keep me quiet, and then you leaked the shipping logs anyway." "I'm going to the press. I'm telling them everything. I'm telling the registry that Cillian Cole, the great tech recluse, has a fetish for barren omegas. I'll drag your name through the mud with mine unless you wire me $10 million right now." Rowan felt sick. A fetish. Is that what the world would think? Is that the narrative Gregory would spin? Rowan was a liability again. A bomb waiting to detonate Cillian's quiet life. "I have to go," Rowan said, his voice breaking. "If I leave, if I go back with him, he won't have anything on you. I can—" "Stop!" Cillian stood up. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. He walked around the desk and stood in front of Rowan. "You aren't going anywhere," Cillian said. "You aren't a liability. You are a resident of this house, and I protect what is mine." Rowan looked up into the pale gray eyes. There was no fear there. There was only the cold, calculating geometry of a predator assessing a very small, very stupid threat. Cillian turned back to the desk and leaned over the microphone. "Gregory," Cillian said. His voice echoed out over the intercom at the gate. It was calm, disaffected. On the monitor, Gregory stopped kicking the pedestal and looked up at the camera, panting heavily. "Listen to me very carefully," Cillian continued. "I did not leak your shipping logs. If I had wanted to ruin you, I wouldn't have used something as pedestrian as domestic shipping fraud." "You're lying!" Gregory yelled. $10 million, Cole, or the defect's medical records go to the tabloids in an hour." Cillian didn't flinch. He sat back down at his keyboard. His fingers began to move, a rapid, rhythmic clatter against the mechanical keys. "I build walls for a living, Gregory," Cillian said into the mic as he typed. "And to build a good wall, you have to know exactly how to tear one down. When I purchased Rowan's contract, I also took the liberty of auditing your personal servers to ensure you hadn't kept any copies of his biometric data." Rowan watched the monitor. Gregory's face lost a fraction of its red, angry hue. "While I was inside your network," Cillian said, his voice a low, terrifying hum, "I found the offshore accounts in the Caymans, the ones you routed your employee pension funds into. I found the emails to the shell companies in Panama. I found the digital signatures you forged to remortgage your family estate." Gregory took a step back from the intercom. The bluster was vanishing, replaced by naked, dawning terror. "You have 30 seconds to get back in your car and drive away," Cillian said. "If you are still on my property when the clock runs out, I hit enter on a script that sends an unencrypted data dump of your pension embezzlement directly to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. You won't just be bankrupt, Gregory. You will die in federal prison." Silence stretched over the intercom. The only sound in the office was the hum of the computer servers and the heavy thud of Rowan's heartbeat. On the screen, Gregory stood paralyzed for 10 seconds. Then he turned, scrambled into the driver's seat of the SUV, and threw the car into reverse. The tires squealed on the asphalt as he backed out onto the main road and sped away, vanishing from the camera's view. Cillian watched the empty driveway for a moment. Then he reached out and pressed the enter key anyway. Rowan gasped. "You sent it?" "He threatened my home," Cillian said simply. He turned off the monitor. "He won't be back. He's going to spend the next 10 years tied up in litigation and criminal hearings." The Alpha leaned back in his chair and scrubbed a hand over his face. He looked suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline crash was setting in. Rowan stared at him. Cillian had just dismantled a corporate empire in less than 3 minutes to protect him. To protect a barren Omega he had no practical use for. Why? Rowan asked. The question tore out of him, raw and desperate. Why did you do that? Why did you buy me? Why do you let me ruin your garden and eat pizza on your floor? You don't want an heir. You don't want a submissive. What do you want from me? Cillian looked at Rowan. The gray eyes were stripped of their usual clinical detachment. They were tired, and they were intensely human. Because I looked at your medical file, Rowan, Cillian said softly, and I saw a reflection. Rowan frowned, confused. A reflection? Cillian stood up. He walked over to the large window overlooking the valley, putting his back to Rowan. Alphas are supposed to be driven by the imperative, Cillian said, his voice quiet against the glass. Dominate, breed, expand territory. It's hardwired into our biology, but my wiring is faulty. He turned his head slightly, looking at Rowan over his shoulder. I don't rut, Rowan. I have no biological urge to mate. The pheromones of a fertile Omega in heat do absolutely nothing to me, to the registry, to the society we live in. An alpha who doesn't breed is just as useless as an Omega who can't carry. Rowan's breath hitched. He stared at the broad back of the man who had bought him. The puzzle pieces suddenly violently clicked into place. The isolation, the lack of demands, the total disinterest in Rowan's body. You're defective too, Rowan breathed. Cillian turned around fully. A bitter, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. I prefer the term non-compliant. But yes, if the board of my former company had found out, I would have been removed as CEO. An alpha who can't continue a dynasty is a weak link. So I cashed out. I built this house. I built my walls, and I stayed behind them. He walked slowly back toward Rowan. When I saw what your father was going to do to you, Cillian continued, his voice dropping to a low, resonant register, I knew exactly what that felt like, to be reduced to a biological failure, to be sold for scrap. I didn't buy you out of pity, Rowan. I bought you because I was angry. I bought you to rob them of a victim. Rowan felt a tear slip down his cheek. He didn't bother to wipe it away. For the first time in his life, he was looking at an alpha and not seeing a master, a threat, or a ledger sheet. He was seeing a mirror. Two broken things, hidden away in a glass house. The silence in the office was thick, but it wasn't heavy. It felt like the moment after a fever finally breaks. Cillian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, which was draped over the back of his chair. He pulled out a thick legal envelope and held it out to Rowan. What is this? Rowan asked, his hands trembling slightly as he took it. It's a dissolution of contract, Cillian said. I had my lawyers draft it last week. It legally emancipates you. It transfers a portion of my liquid assets into an independent trust in your name. You have enough money to buy a house, start a business, disappear to Europe, whatever you want. The registry has been wiped. You are a free citizen. Rowan stared at the heavy cream envelope. It was the thing he had dreamed of in the dark back of his father's town car. Freedom. Absolute, unmitigated freedom. No collars, no contracts, no expectations. He opened the flap and pulled out the crisp, legally binding documents. He saw his name. He saw Cillian's signature at the bottom, already stamped and notarized. You're letting me go, Rowan whispered. You were never a prisoner, Rowan, Cillian said quietly. But as long as I held that contract, you were still an asset on paper. This makes it real. You don't have to stay here and hide from the world just because I do. Rowan looked down at the papers. He thought about Europe. He thought about an apartment in a city where no one knew his name. Then he thought about the tomatoes in the greenhouse. He thought about the smell of ozone during a thunderstorm. He thought about cold pizza on the living room rug and the quiet, steady presence of the man standing in front of him. A man who tore down corporate empires just to make sure Rowan felt safe in his own kitchen. Rowan had spent his entire life being told that his worth was tied to his ability to leave a legacy, to breed, to serve. But looking at Cillian, He realized that a legacy wasn't just bloodlines and stock portfolios. A legacy could be the quiet space you carved out of a brutal world. A legacy could be choosing someone who saw your broken pieces and didn't ask you to fix them. Rowan slowly folded the documents in half. Then he folded them again. He walked over to Cillian's desk, picked up a heavy brass paperweight, and set it squarely on top of the folded envelope. Cillian watched him, his gray eyes wide with a rare, unfiltered shock. "What are you doing?" "I'm keeping it for my records," Rowan said, his voice remarkably steady. "But I'm not leaving." Cillian took a step forward. The space between them evaporated. "Rowan, you don't understand. I can't give you a normal life. I can't give you the biological bond. I don't want a normal life," Rowan interrupted fiercely. "A normal life is what my father had. A normal life is selling your child to balance a ledger. I want this life." He closed the remaining distance. He didn't bare his neck in submission. He didn't look down. He looked directly into Cillian's eyes, meeting the alpha as an equal. Slowly, deliberately, Rowan reached out. His fingers, rough and calloused from the garden dirt, brushed against Cillian's hand. Cillian flinched slightly, a reflex born of years of isolation, but he didn't pull away. Rowan slid his fingers over Cillian's knuckles, feeling the tension in the alpha's hand. He interlaced their fingers. The contact was electric, a grounding wire connecting two overloaded circuits. "You build walls, Cillian," Rowan said softly, his thumb tracing the ridge of the alpha's knuckles. "And you're very good at it. But you built this one entirely around yourself." Cillian looked down at their joined hands. The scent of cedarwood bloomed in the room, rich, warm, and overwhelmingly vulnerable. "It's quiet inside," Cillian murmured, his voice rough. "I know," Rowan said. He stepped closer, leaning his weight slightly against the alpha's chest. He felt Cillian's arm come up, hesitant at first, before wrapping firmly around Rowan's waist, anchoring him. "But there's plenty of room for two." They stood there in the quiet office, surrounded by the glow of the servers and the fading afternoon light. There was no grand declaration. There was no biting, no marking, no ancient biological imperative forcing them together. It was just a choice, and as Rowan buried his face in the crook of Cillian's neck, breathing in the deep, clean scent of a storm that had finally passed, he knew it was the best choice he had ever made. Sometimes the greatest rebellion isn't a war, it's simply planting a garden in the dirt of ruined expectations. Rowan and Cillian didn't need a biological imperative, a corporate ledger, or society's blessing to build their sanctuary. They just needed a locked door and a choice. Viewers who found this story about surviving the bottom line and defining self-worth resonant are encouraged to hit the like button. Sharing this video helps those who need a reminder that they are more than a bad investment. Viewers can subscribe to the channel for more grounded, emotional stories before the next upload.